Is it fair, or is the system rigged against you from the very start? You see the flashing blue lights in your rearview mirror. You hear the words "you're under arrest," and you trust that justice will follow. You trust in the idea of innocent until proven guilty. But what if that's not really how it works? What if, for some police officers in the UK, the moment they decide you're a suspect, they've already made up their mind? This isn't about a rule written down in a book. This is about a hidden one, an unspoken procedure, a mindset that can infect an investigation right from the beginning. It's a secret rule that says, "I've got my suspect, now I just have to prove it." Today, we're not just talking about a few bad apples. We're talking about the culture that allows them to thrive. We're exposing the procedural rot that lets police build a case against you, not to find the truth, but to get a conviction, even if it means ignoring evidence that proves you're innocent. We'll show you how this secret rule has destroyed lives, and how it could one day affect yours. We're all told that a fair justice system is like a set of scales. On one side, you have the power of the state to investigate and prosecute crime. On the other, you have the rights of the individual to be treated fairly and to be presumed innocent. In the United Kingdom, that balance is meant to be guaranteed by law. In codes of practice, every single police officer swears to follow. These rules are supposed to be a shield for the innocent, ensuring an investigation is a search for the truth, no matter where it leads. But what happens when that shield is thrown away? What happens when the people paid to protect you decide, right from the outset, that you're the villain of the story they're writing? A growing pile of evidence, found in court judgments, independent inquiries, and the tragic stories of ruined lives, points to a disturbing reality. It suggests the official rulebook is often ignored in favor of an unwritten, but powerful, alternative, a default presumption of guilt. This isn't just a simple mistake. It's a mindset. It's a culture where the goal isn't to solve a crime, but to close a case. It's a world where getting the job done means bending the rules, ignoring inconvenient facts, and focusing only on what confirms an officer's initial hunch. It's a dangerous psychological trap called confirmation bias, and when it's combined with the immense power of the police, it becomes one of the biggest threats to our liberty. Today, we're going to the heart of this problem. First, we'll look at the official rules, what the law actually says about how police are supposed to investigate. Then, we'll confront the grim reality of what happens when those rules are broken. We'll examine two of the most devastating miscarriages of justice in modern British history, telling the stories of Andrew Malkinson and the Stockwell Six, people whose lives were shattered not because there was no evidence of their innocence, but because the system chose to ignore it. Through their experiences, we'll expose how this secret rules of assuming guilt works in the real world. We'll explore the psychological traps and organizational pressures that lead officers down this path, a path sometimes called noble cause corruption, where police believe they're doing the right thing by using the wrong methods to catch a bad guy. And finally, we'll look at the devastating consequences: innocent people locked away, the real criminals left free to harm again, and the trust between the public and the police completely eroded. This is the story of how a system designed to find truth can be twisted into a machine for manufacturing guilt. Before we see how badly investigations can go wrong, it's important to understand how they're supposed to go right. The British legal system isn't naive. It knows that bias is a risk in policing. To fight this, a detailed framework was created, mainly under the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984, or PACE. The whole point of PACE was to strike that delicate balance between giving police the power to fight crime and protecting the rights of the public. At the very core of this framework is a principle that flatly contradicts the secret rules of assuming guilt. This is the investigator's duty to pursue all reasonable lines of inquiry. That isn't just a suggestion, it's the law. The Criminal Procedure and Investigations Act 1996 is crystal clear. Investigators have to pursue inquiries whether they point towards or away from the suspect. That single phrase is the legal foundation of a fair investigation. It means an officer can't just decide you're guilty and then work backward, collecting only the evidence that fits their theory. They have a legal duty to look for evidence that might clear you too. The College of Policing, which sets professional standards, reinforces this with even more direct guidance. Their training is built on impartiality and warns investigators not to assume guilt. In fact, they are trained on a mantra that should be the guiding star of every investigation. Assume nothing, believe nothing, challenge everything. Each part of that phrase is a direct antidote to the poison of presumed guilt. Assume nothing. This means an officer can't let a gut feeling at a crime scene dictate the whole investigation. They can't assume the nervous person is the guilty one, or that someone with a prior conviction is automatically responsible for this new crime. It demands that every case is approached like a blank slate, a puzzle to be solved, not a story that's already been written. Believe nothing. This might sound cynical, but in an investigation it's about professional skepticism. It means an officer can't take a single piece of information, even from a credible-seeming witness, as pure fact without trying to confirm it. Witness accounts can be wrong, identifications can be mistaken, confessions can even be false. The investigator's job is to test these things, not just accept them, challenge everything. This is maybe the most important and the most difficult part. It means investigators have to actively fight their own biases. The human brain naturally leans towards confirmation bias, our tendency to search for and favor information that confirms what we already think. In a criminal investigation, that's a disaster. An officer who locks onto a theory of guilt early on will subconsciously see everything through that lens. Evidence of guilt seems more important, while evidence of innocence gets downplayed, ignored, or explained away. The College of Policing knows this is a huge danger and explicitly tells investigators to be aware of and minimize their own unconscious biases. This duty has real-world consequences. It means if a suspect gives an alibi, the police have to check it out properly. If a victim says their attacker had a huge scar on their face and the suspect doesn't, that's a line of inquiry that points away from the suspect and must be taken seriously. If another person's DNA is found all over the crime scene, that's a massive line of inquiry that has to be chased down. So the official rulebooks is clear. The law and the professional standards of British policing demand an open-minded, impartial search for the truth. An investigator's job is not to prove guilt, it is to investigate a crime. They are supposed to be objective fact-finders. The system is designed, at least on paper, to prevent the very thing we're talking about today. But as we're about to see, the gap between what's written in the rulebook and what happens on the street can be a chasm, and the people who fall into that chasm are the innocent, the victims of a system that fails to follow its own most important rules. If you want to understand the human cost of a police investigation that presumes guilt, you need to know the name Andrew Malkinson. His story isn't just a tragedy, it's a catastrophic failure of the entire system, a 20-year nightmare, fueled by the very culture we've been talking about. It's one of the worst miscarriages of justice in modern British history, and it gives us a devastatingly clear look at the secret rules in action. It started in July 2003. A 33-year-old woman in Greater Manchester was brutally attacked and raped. The pressure on Greater Manchester Police (GMP) to find the man responsible was immense. The victim gave a description and, crucially, remembered scratching her attacker deeply across his face. Right here is the first fork in the road. where an investigation can go right or wrong. An impartial investigation would treat that scratch as a key piece of information to test against any suspect. Andrew Malkinson was a 37-year-old security guard living nearby. A day after the attack, police visited him. They saw he had no scratch on his face. In an objective investigation, this should have been a major piece of evidence pointing to his innocence. But it was ignored. 2 weeks later, Andrew Malkinson was arrested. The case against him wasn't built on forensics. There were none, but on deeply flawed eyewitness identification. The victim picked Malkinson from a video lineup. But ID evidence is notoriously unreliable. The more damning evidence came from 2 other witnesses who claimed they saw someone near the scene. And this is where the secret rules of assuming guilt took hold. Instead of impartially checking these witnesses, the police seemed to have embraced them because their story fit the theory that Malkinson was the man. But what the police didn't tell the defense, the judge, or the jury was explosive. Both of these key witnesses had extensive criminal records. One of them only came forward after being arrested for other crimes, a classic red flag that a witness might be looking for a deal. These weren't minor details. They were grave and repeated failures by GMP to disclose the truth. An impartial investigation would have scrutinized their motives. Instead, their criminal pasts were hidden. The jury never heard the truth about who was pointing the finger at Andrew Malkinson. At his trial in 2004, Malkinson was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. The prosecution even argued that the lack of his DNA at the scene was a sign of his guilt, claiming he was forensically aware. It's a perfect example of confirmation bias. Evidence that points away from guilt, no DNA, gets twisted into more proof of guilt. He was smart enough not to leave any. For the next 17 years, Andrew Malkinson was in prison, insisting he was innocent. He did this knowing that in the UK prison system, refusing to admit guilt means you are often denied parole because you're seen as in denial and still a danger. He paid a heavy price for telling the truth, serving an extra 10 years. But the most damning part of this story was yet to come. In 2007, just 3 years after he was convicted, a forensic review took place. They re-examined samples from the crime scene. What they found should have freed him instantly. On the victim's vest top, they found a full DNA profile of a man. That DNA did not belong to Andrew Malkinson. It belonged to an unknown male. This was irrefutable scientific proof that another man was the attacker. This was the ultimate line of inquiry pointing away from the suspect. The police and the Crown Prosecution Service were told about this monumental discovery in 2007. Did they rush to the Court of Appeal? Did they launch an urgent hunt for the real attacker? No, they did nothing. They decided to take no further action. The evidence that could prove a man's innocence was buried. Think about the mindset required for that to happen. To look at DNA evidence that exonerates a man you've imprisoned for life and decide to do nothing is the most extreme expression of the secret rules. It's the system protecting its conviction, not pursuing justice. It gets worse. Malkinson, with help from the charity Appeal, fought on. He applied to the Criminal Cases Review Commission, CCRC, the body set up to investigate miscarriages of justice. The CCRC knew about the DNA, but in 2012, they refused to refer his case for appeal, even citing concerns about the cost of more testing. They failed him again in 2020. The supposed watchdog of the justice system dismissed the most significant evidence of innocence imaginable. Meanwhile, Greater Manchester Police destroyed vital evidence, including the victim's clothing that held the DNA. It wasn't until Malkinson's own legal team finally got the DNA retested and found a match on the national database in 2022 that the cover-up crumbled. The DNA belonged to another man. In July 2023, after 17 years in a prison cell for a crime he didn't commit, Andrew Malkinson's conviction was finally quashed. The court ruled the conviction was unsafe, not just because of the DNA, but because of the original grave failures by the police to disclose the truth about their witnesses. Andrew Malkinson's case is a textbook example of the secret rules. From the start, evidence of innocence was ignored. Witness credibility issues were deliberately hidden, and worst of all, exonerating DNA evidence was buried for over a decade. The system wasn't looking for the truth, it was protecting a conviction. It shows how confirmation bias, once it takes hold, can blind an entire chain of justice from the cop on the beat to the highest levels of review. It's the story of a man failed not just by individuals, but by a culture. If Andrew Malkinson's case shows a modern system corrupted by bias, the story of the Stockwell Six takes us back to the 1970s and reveals the blueprint for this kind of police misconduct. It's a case that proves the secret rules of assuming guilt is nothing new. It's a deep historical problem, rooted in a toxic mix of power, racism, and one corrupt officer who knew he could fabricate guilt and get away with it. This is the story of Detective Sergeant Derek Ridgewell. In the early 1970s, Ridgewell was an officer with the British Transport Police, part of an anti-robbery squad on the London Underground. He developed a brutal routine. He would target young black men, falsely accuse them of robbery, make up the evidence, and then lie in court to get them convicted. His method was simple. He was a police officer, and in the 1970s, his word against a group of young black men was almost always enough. In February 1972, a group of friends, including Courtney Harriott, Paul Green, and Cleveland Davidson, were on the tube at Stockwell Station. They were just teens and young men, aged 17 to 20. Suddenly, they were jumped by plainclothes men, Ridgewell and his squad. They were arrested and taken to the station. There, the nightmare began. The men were charged with trying to rob Detective Sergeant Ridgewell. At their trial, Ridgewell gave a dramatic, completely made-up story. He claimed the young men surrounded him, that one pulled a knife, and that he bravely fought them off before his colleagues swooped in. The 6 defendants, who became known as the Stockwell Six, all pleaded not guilty. They told the jury what really happened, that they were ambushed by the police, threatened, and had words put in their mouths. They were describing a stitch-up, but this was 1972. The jury, faced with the confident testimony of a detective versus the desperate denials of a group of young black men, chose to believe the officer. It was the secret rules in its purest form. The police version of events was the default truth. 5 of the 6 were convicted. Courtney Harriott was sent to prison for 3 years. Paul Green was sent to a youth detention center. Their lives were wrecked by a complete lie. For decades, those convictions stood. Then the architect of their misery, Derek Ridgewell, was moved to a department investigating mailbag theft. There, instead of investigating crime, he became a master criminal. He went into business with professional thieves, conspiring to steal over £1 million worth of goods from mailbags. Eventually, he was caught. In 1980, Derek Ridgewell was convicted of conspiracy to steal and sentenced to 7 years in prison. He died there of a heart attack in 1982. The man who built his career sending innocent people to jail died a convicted felon. That should have immediately triggered a review of every conviction he was ever involved in, but it didn't. The system, once again, chose to protect itself. The convictions of the Stockwell Six remained for another 40 years. It was only through the tireless work of campaigners and the Criminal Cases Review Commission that the truth finally, painfully, began to surface. The CCRC concluded that Ridgewell's corruption was so profound that his evidence in any case was worthless. Beginning in 2021, nearly 50 years after they were framed, the convictions of the Stockwell Six were finally quashed. By July 2025, all 6 of the wrongful convictions had been overturned. The case of the Stockwell Six is a stark lesson in how the secret rule can be weaponized. Ridgwell didn't just suffer from unconscious bias. He deliberately framed people he thought he could get away with framing. He exploited a system and a society that was already predisposed to believe a white police officer over a group of young black men. He knew that once he pointed the finger, the machine of justice would grind towards a guilty verdict. He didn't need to find evidence. He was the evidence. His lies were enough. The stories of Andrew Malkinson and the Stockwell Six aren't just isolated tragedies. They're symptoms of a deeper sickness. They reveal a pattern, a cultural mindset that operates in the shadows of the official rule book. So let's pull back the curtain and look at how this happens. First, and most insidiously, is confirmation bias. This is that natural human glitch where we favor information that confirms what we already believe. In policing, it's a professional hazard that, if unchecked, is fatal to justice. When an officer decides early on, "This is my guy," their whole perception shifts. In Andrew Malkinson's case, once police decided he was their suspect, contradictory evidence was warped or ignored. No scratch on his face. Ignored. No DNA. He must be forensically aware. The powerful evidence of another man's DNA wasn't seen as proof of innocence. It was an inconvenient problem to be buried. The police weren't testing a theory. They were building a case to support it. They started looking for evidence of guilt, not evidence of the crime. The second mechanism is a more sinister cousin of bias. Noble cause corruption. This is what happens when officers believe they are doing the right thing for a good reason, even if it's illegal. It's the idea that the ends justify the means. An officer who is convinced they're dealing with a dangerous criminal might feel that cutting a few corners is worth it to get that person off the streets. This can mean fabricating evidence, lying in reports, or hiding evidence that might help the suspect. Derek Ridgwell might have seen himself as just cleaning up the streets. In that dangerous mindset, the people he was targeting were probably guilty of something, so making sure they were convicted was a public service. And all of this is enabled by the third factor, systemic and institutional failure. A single biased officer is a problem. But when the system protects them, it's a crisis. It's what happens when supervisors don't challenge their investigators' assumptions. It's what happens when the very safety nets of the justice system fail. The Criminal Cases Review Commission was created to be an independent backstop, yet in Andrew Malkinson's case, they were presented with powerful DNA evidence and refused to act. When the last hope for the innocent becomes part of the problem, the system is fundamentally broken. Time and again, we see the rules on disclosing evidence being broken. Vital evidence is lost or destroyed. The criminal backgrounds of key witnesses are hidden. Every one of these failures is a crack in the foundation of a fair trial. The secret rules isn't really a rule. It's a toxic culture born from psychological flaws, a dangerous ethical framework, and a failure of oversight. It's a culture that prioritizes closing a case over the impartial search for truth. So where does this leave us? We've seen the stark contrast between the promise of British justice and its sometimes terrible reality. The law is clear. Investigators must be impartial. They must follow the evidence, even when it points away from their suspect. But as the stories of Andrew Malkinson and the Stockwell Six show, a secret, unwritten rule often takes over the assumption of guilt. It's a rule that allows an investigation to become a self-fulfilling prophecy, where the goal is no longer to discover the truth, but to validate a hunch. When police and the institutions meant to hold them accountable ignore evidence of innocence, the consequences are catastrophic. Andrew Malkinson lost 17 years. The Stockwell Six were branded criminals for half a century, and for every case that is overturned, you have to ask how many more are there. How many other innocent people are in a prison cell because an officer decided they were guilty and just stopped looking for the truth? This isn't an attack on the thousands of honest police officers who do their job with integrity. It's a critique of a culture that allows bias and misconduct to fester, a culture that too often closes ranks to protect a conviction rather than admitting a mistake. When that happens, the entire justice system is compromised, and public trust is shattered. The answer has to start with acknowledging the problem. It requires relentless training that actively fights confirmation bias. It demands robust, independent supervision. It means the CCRC must be reformed to be the fearless watchdog it was intended to be. And it requires real consequences for those who deliberately hide evidence to secure a conviction. But change from the top is slow. The most powerful defense against a system that can presume your guilt is knowledge. It's understanding your rights. It's knowing that the police have a duty to investigate your innocence just as much as your guilt. By shining a light on these failures, we empower ourselves and hold the system to account. What do you think about these cases? Do you believe the system has a problem with assuming guilt? Let us know in the comments below. And if you believe in holding power to account, make sure you subscribe and share this video. The more people who understand the problem, the louder the call for change will be.